I gotta say, you look just like me. Except, you're more angry back alley than friendly neighborhood.
Oh, for decades I've wanted to shut that mouth of yours. Finally, that time is upon me.
At last, I will crush you once and for all!
Hey, what's wrong with you? I worked on that helmet for a week.
Cosplay's not a crime, Spider-Man. Chill out. But regardless, welcome back, true believers and all you spectacular Spidey fans, to another very exciting and rather sinister Marvel's Spider-Man 2 related video. And while we're not looking at the Sinister Six themselves, who already played a fairly big role within the first Marvel Spider-Man game, this time we are looking at my personal picks for the top 5 villains I personally think we desperately need to see within Marvel's Spider-Man 2. Now, if you're someone who does want a reminder as to who exactly has pretty much been all but confirmed to be appearing within Marvel's Spider-Man 2, I did in fact make a previous video going over all the currently confirmed villains that we do know about that are set to be included within the game. So be sure to check that video out if you haven't already. But for my own personal villain wish list, we are going to go over specific Spidey foes who we have currently not fought against in the previous Insomniac games, with that of course being Spider-Man PS4 and Miles Morales. We also know that a majority of this particular rogues gallery already exists within the Insomniac Spider-Man universe, so it wouldn't be all that surprising if we were to see them fully appear within the official sequel. And as always, if at least one of these villains ends up fully appearing in some way or another within Marvel's Spider-Man 2, that would just be a dream come true. So going in no particular order for this list is none other than the half-brother of one of the main villains who was already teased in the Marvel Spider-Man 2 teaser trailer of Kraven the Hunter. And in this case, I am directly referring to none other than the Chameleon.
You're back already? I thought you were checking out that fire.
Right. On my way now. Which way was it again?
Last time you went that way. South.
Thanks. Got a little turned around. Someone's impersonating me. It could be the Chameleon again. I've got to pick up his trail.
Now, while another major classic Spidey foe with that of the Vulture is known by the majority of people to be the first official supervillain that Spider-Man actually faced off against in the comics, which of course we do see him appear fully in the first Spider-Man game, in all actuality, the Chameleon is one of the first big foes that Spidey did face off against back in the early 60s. And while the Chameleon may not be as super strong or super smart as some of the other villains that we've already seen be featured in the previous Spider-Man games, his overall power of illusion and impersonating others does have a major effect when it does come to going up against Spider-Man, which in turn makes him out to be more of a psychological threat in comparison to more of a physical one. So having the opportunity for Insomniac to completely include this insanely classic villain within a AAA Spider-Man game of this scale, especially considering Chameleon's connection to Kraven, would just be pure perfection. Now next up is going over one of the more tragic villains on this list, which, fun fact, has already been featured in a pretty prominent role within Spider-Man PS4. And that, my fellow Spidey fans, refers directly to none other than Dr. Morgan Michaels, or, to apply a name that you might be more familiar with, is actually a alias for Dr. Michael Morbius, also known as Morbius the Living Vampire.
You okay?
Did they take it?
Yes. How worried should I be?
Very.
So yes, Dr. Morgan Michaels from Spider-Man PS4, who, if you do recall, was the head scientist behind the Devil's Breath formula, and Dr. Michael Morbius are indeed one and the same. And even though Dr. Michaels was pretty much viewed as an ally for Spider-Man within that game's story, since he did end up making a cure for the Devil's Breath formula by the end of the game, we don't necessarily know how he might be faring by the time Marvel's Spider-Man 2 comes around. Plus, if we're gonna be dealing with some pretty monstrous Spider-Man villains within the sequel as it currently stands, like that of Venom and in all likelihood the Lizard, I certainly think that throwing Morbius in the mix as well wouldn't be too much outside of Insomniac's wheelhouse. However, the next villain on my list might be a bit of a surprising one. And in fact, this particular villain was a character that I did want to see fully appear within Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales before that game officially released. And in this instance, I am talking about none other than the Beetle, who you may know as prominently a male character, but in the comics has at one point taken the role from none other than Janice Lincoln. And if that Lincoln name might sound familiar, you wouldn't be wrong considering that is the last name of Lonnie Lincoln, also known as Tombstone, who we did provide a massive beating to within Spider-Man PS4.
Hell of a left hook. Can't wait for the rematch.
I can.
I like you.
So either way, if Insomniac ends up including Beetle either as a male or female, I think it would be very cool to include the character in Marvel's Spider-Man 2 nonetheless, just to simply expand on Spider-Man's rogues gallery. But knowing how good of a writing team Insomniac has to deliver truly encapsulating story moments within this Spider-Man universe, I definitely think that having Janice Lincoln take on the role of Beetle in order to get revenge for her father would be a very fitting story beat. And in all honesty, I do think including a villain like Beetle within Marvel's Spider-Man 2 would only be used as a side villain, just like what we saw with Tombstone in Spider-Man PS4. But regardless, I do think fleshing out that Tombstone storyline from Spider-Man PS4 just a bit further within Marvel's Spider-Man 2, if they do decide to make Janice Lincoln the Beetle instead of the male counterpart, would be pretty darn cool no matter what. So as we draw closer to the end of my list, we're now moving a bit back to more of the classic Spider-Man foes that you're all usually accustomed to. And seeing how both of these remaining villains do put up quite a good fight against Spider-Man, I definitely think seeing both Peter and Miles tag team against them would just add a whole nother level of awesome in comparison to simply having Peter or Miles go up against them solo. And for my penultimate pick, I'm choosing none other than Flint Marko, aka the Sandman, and in fact is still currently trapped in a small vial of sand which you can find in one of Peter Parker's collectible backpacks, which is actually located all the way at the very top of Avengers Tower.
Marko? Marko?
Polo!
Oh man, and I thought my jokes were bad.
Now in all honesty, if Insomniac were to include Sandman in Marvel's Spider-Man 2, given the previous circumstances I just mentioned, I do think he would be used more of a graphical showcase villain instead of a more narrative-focused one. Meaning that due to the fact that Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is a complete PlayStation 5 exclusive, I certainly think that Insomniac can do some really crazy things with designing some of more Spider-Man's intricate-looking foes, like that of course with Venom and the symbiote powers that are likely going to be included in that character, and of course Sandman, who, obviously, is made entirely of sand. And simply imagining you as Peter and Miles trying to take down Sandman with all the sand particles flying all over the place would just be a complete visual feast for the eyes. Plus, if he manages to turn into a giant version of Sandman, that would make things even crazier. And lastly, the same logic does in fact apply with not only being a complete visual showcase which would blow absolutely everyone's minds running exclusively on the PlayStation 5, but I also think that there could be some very intricate narrative beats that Insomniac could incorporate for this particular foe, and if you haven't guessed by the thumbnail already, I am directly referring to none other than the Master of Illusion himself, the menacing Mysterio.
It's payback time.
Payback? For what? You did it all to yourself!
Yes, that's what my psychiatrist said. But you know what? His sessions never made me feel this good.
Out of all the previous villains I've listed so far, this is the one particular adversary I think needs to be included within the game above all else. Just like with Sandman and Chameleon, we already know full well that Spider-Man has completely faced off against and beaten Mysterio within the Insomniac Spider-Man universe. And alongside of this, we've actually already seen a quick glimpse of Quentin Beck in the Insomniac Spider-Man universe, thanks to one of the tie-in comics of Marvel's Spider-Man Velocity. However, in that comic, it is implied that even though Peter has faced off against Mysterio in this game's world, it doesn't seem like he necessarily knows that Quentin Beck is in fact Mysterio. But more importantly, simply thinking about what Insomniac could be able to pull off with Mysterio's character running exclusively on the PlayStation 5 hardware with all of his absolutely insane illusions easily make for a completely jaw-dropping experience. We've already seen some of the crazy hallucinations that Spidey can have from the first game when he was poisoned by Scorpion. And if you directly remember that amazing sequence from the first game thanks to a bad batch of poison, I can only imagine what Mysterio's illusions would look like in comparison. Alongside of the Dark Knight himself, Spider-Man easily has one of, if not the best rogues gallery within the entirety of superhero comics. And if by some miracle at least one, if not maybe all of these foes ends up being included within Marvel's Spider-Man 2, that is going to make for potentially one of, if not the best Spider-Man games ever made. So fingers crossed that at least one of these villains ends up getting their time to shine. But with all that said, everyone, that's the video that I have for you today, and please let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. What do you think of my top 5 personal wish list of the main villains I do want to see be featured in Marvel's Spider-Man 2, and which villains would you personally like to see be included within the game? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. Leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy, and for more Marvel Spider-Man 2 videos like this down the line. And without further ado, peace out.